Where are we?
This is Mark McNeese in New York City, and you're listening to another edition of Live Mic with Mark. Welcome to the podcast, everybody. This is Mark, and my guest this evening is on the line already out in Rancho Mirage, I believe it is. It's Joy Silver. She has an MA and is the principal for SilverSenior Living, consulting for diverse and sustainable aging communities, headquartered in Rancho Mirage. Now, Joy, your bio is really extensive, and we might run out of time if I read the whole thing. But you served as the Chief Strategy Officer at Choices Women's Medical Center, Inc., a New York State Article 28 Ambulatory Surgery Center in Jamaica, New York. And I'm going to end up asking you if that means you lived here. And you were president and CEO and was the founding principal and visionary for RainbowVision Properties out of Santa Fe, New Mexico. You're a board member at Griot Circle, Inc., a Brooklyn, New York grassroots organization seeking to address the needs of older lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender citizens, especially people of color. And you were a two-term board member for both LAIN, which is the Lesbian and Gay Aging Issues Network of the American Society for Aging, and the LGBT Historical Society, San Francisco, California. And you were an advisor for New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson's 2008 presidential campaign. And that's about half of what I could read. That's a lot. Now, I met you at the LGBT Elder Housing Summit at the White House, and I was thrilled because we met outside before we went in, and you said, "Oh, I read your website, LGBTSR." So that always, makes me happy to know that people know that it's there.
Right.
And let's just dive into it.
All right. Well, good afternoon, Mark. And it is wonderful when there are communications, particularly crafted for LGBT seniors, because like seniors in general, in the general culture, seniors can be left out of information and communications. It's essential, especially if it's LGBT at all levels of society. So I'm really happy to see that you're doing something like this. So I just want to commend you for that effort.
Well, thank you. I realized today that I could not find another podcast for this audience.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of podcasts out there, comedy podcasts and talk podcasts, but I realized that I think that I'm sort of the only one, and that made me happy too. I'd like to see more, of course, but it's always nice to know that I'm doing something that there's not a lot of. Which was the case just a few years ago with websites and really even addressing LGBT aging issues. Sage has been doing it for many years, but it was not. I don't think it was very much in the public consciousness. Now, how did you get involved with these issues?
Well, it's an interesting. I would say first of all that it was enlightened self-interest. I think would describe it the best. Because somewhere along the line, let's go back to where this sort of came to be. First of all, I need your audience to know, and this was not necessarily in my bio, but in the late 70s, I was in an all-female band called Lilith.
Oh, my gosh.
Yes. I was a bass player and a singer, and we played every gay and lesbian event at that time, and certainly many dances and events that were not necessarily LGBT, but that was certainly our specialty. And we played out in the Northampton, Massachusetts area, which we fondly, all of us who were out there at the time, and they have some big women's colleges out there like Smith and Mount Holyoke, so naturally one would assume there were lesbian women out there. We now fondly call it the old country, because when we really get down to it and we find each other again, were you out in Northampton in those years? Yes, I was there too. So a lot of that goes on.
Mm-hmm.
And the creation of community really came to my consciousness through this particular time period from the culture of events and experience and seeing ourselves in the culture. And so music and gatherings of gay and lesbian people started to formulate some other culture besides, and this was the popular form of music, was disco at that time. And more of a bar scene that did not necessarily involve live music. But in the live venues in the colleges that we played began to start to form the experiential culture that we were living in. And so this started my understanding of community in that sense, that community was experiential and that it was something that we remembered through our lives for big events in our lives. And certainly some of the big events were in our youth were leaving home, identifying who we were, coming out to people we knew, some of us coming out to family members, some of us being cut off by family members for doing that. And all of this fabric sort of weaved together for the experience of community. So this was my early understanding. And from that point, when I had to going to New York City, because now I was going to be a rock star, I certainly was a legend in my own mind. I went and did what many young people do, and that's go to New York to seek my, I wouldn't say fortune, but certainly my career as I saw it at the time. And there came to be a point when I decided that, I needed some health care and the other kinds of things that the music business and the nightclub business was not affording me. And then that's what brought me to New York, those two, that moving there for the music business, but then ultimately getting to Choices Women's Medical Center back in 1991. And Choices Women's Medical Center was a center that provided reproductive health care services. And so I became knowledgeable in medical issues and health services issues and brought to bear many of my, I had also gone to graduate school when I had lived in the Boston area, and there I took my master's in women's studies. So there was a convergence there of my understanding theoretically and historically, and then what was the practical application providing healthcare services. So in 1997, I was basically following the boomer population and realized that healthcare services were also going to, if we followed the boomers' trajectory, because here you have the biggest number of people in a generation, and I lived in New York City when the AIDS epidemic hit. And so, the other experience and culture became going to funerals and losing our friends and just going through what all of that meant in New York City in the 80s. And certainly we, those of us who lived through that or lost our friends have a whole sense of experience that much of the mainstream doesn't necessarily share. So we put those things together, and the fact that I was in healthcare services, it almost, in a way, you can sort of see how now I was moving to what was our lives as seniors going to look like. Those men who had survived that, and we also, and this is the real point, we were looking at end-of-life issues, but at an earlier age. And that triggered off my concept and interest in facing the end of life and the issues and challenges that were associated with it. And most people really don't face that in the numbers that we were facing it then in those days until we get much older.
Well, that's absolutely true. I was living in Los Angeles, and that's how I ended up in New York. I had lost all these friends, and I had a partner who died in 91. And everywhere I went, there were ghosts everywhere.
Yeah.
I'd been in this theater with this person and, this grocery store with this person, and they were all gone. And I had a chance to move here, and I thought, well, that's really drastic, and I won't know anybody who's ill, which is true. So I ended up coming to this coast to try and, just sort of start over and not have a life full of loss. And you're absolutely right too about experiencing that at an unnaturally early age. When you lose your friends, and especially when you lose a spouse or a partner, and you're 32 years old, that's like, wow.
Exactly.
It's we went through things at a just an abnormally young age, which is, I think, what you're saying. Yeah.
We had the accelerated experience that many people don't face till 70, 80, and 90.
Mm-hmm.
The loss of a spouse, the finding of friends, not knowing people because they're all, have passed on. I mean, this is actually many seniors have this experience. And yet, like you say, we were experiencing it in our 20s and in our 30s. And so it isn't a far leap to take it to that next section of life as to, well, if that's what it looks like now, what's it going to look like when we're seniors? And combine that with something that I had said to you just a couple of minutes ago, and to those who are listening. Some of us were no longer welcome in our families. Mm-hmm. I know I had my own personal experience like that. And we began to build what we called, in that time period, our family of choice. And with lesbians, every person that was ever our partner, if we broke up, they became like our sisters in our family groups,
Mm-hmm.
And so we created our own extended family of peers, and if peers had mothers or fathers that were accepting, we just adopted their parents, which I had done, and I'm sure people that have done that, if there were those parents who were accepting of this. And we created our own families. And so now, creating our family, having the experience of what most seniors will eventually face in one way or another, the challenges and of both mental capacity diminishment and physical mobility issues, and dementia, and all of the things that we experienced with end-of-life issues with AIDS. It's a whole cultural experience that became important to me because I was living it, to move towards, LGBT senior communities. What will they look like? How will we find each other once we're not running to bars to meet people anymore? How will we recognize each other? I mean, so even companionship, you yourself left the city to start a new life, but you knew there were gay people in New York, but
a few.
Yeah, there was a few in New York, but what happens when we're at an age where, we've lost our partner and we want to find another one, and maybe we don't live in New York, and as we age, we're not running down to a bar to meet somebody, so how do we do this? And so all of these concerns really inspired and motivated me to move towards LGBT senior living community and services and what that vision might look like. And so the concept of this, I started with an idea of doing it in Palm Springs, and then kind of tabled it and created a grander vision that included levels of care, and that became RainbowVision Santa Fe. And it took 9 years, but the partners in my business and myself were able to get it out of the ground, get it financed, opened, and operating in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And so that actually happened. We had a vision for more properties, but then we were sidetracked. I don't know what you would exactly call it, but the economic crisis that the world experienced kind of derailed, us getting to that place of more properties and moving forward with that.
I wanted to touch on a couple of things. One is just so people don't always understand that you can't have LGBTQ housing. It has to be, friendly or inclusive because of housing laws. And I don't know that anyone would want that anyways, but just I think there are some people who don't know that. You can't put up housing that is only LGBT people. Mm-hmm. I'm correct on that, yes?
Well, yes, you're correct. And we should talk about that a little bit, because most senior living communities are predominantly heterosexual.
Right.
And they are not allowed to exclude LGBT people. So let's look at it from that side of it. However, they are predominantly heterosexual, and they are marketed predominantly to heterosexual people. And
Yes.
How do you know this? Because they always show men and women with their children, with silver hair, and so their marketing is targeted to their audience, and usually white, by the way. I want to add that it's also a racial thing, because they're just, most of the advertising we see are two white people who look, pretty middle America. Happy middle America white people who are heterosexual. So if I look at that, I'm going to say, well, heterosexual people, that's really who they're building for, even though they're not allowed to keep me out. Conversely, RainbowVision's marketing was never kept out heterosexual people, but our advertising showed two men, two women, multiple races. And so our marketing was targeted towards LGBT people.
Mm-hmm.
And so when anybody looked at our information, they said, wow, that's the place. If they're gay or bisexual or transgender, they would say that that's where they would want to be. And so we also targeted channels and went to events where LGBT people were when we put out our marketing campaign. So pretty much that, I think, works both ways on that.
Yes, and another thing I wanted to touch on is that because housing is an issue, and we have obstacles that are unique to LGBT people, and not everybody understands that. I mean, a lot of people do. A lot of people, especially people who work in the field, or advocates. But I know sometimes somebody might wonder, well, why did we need a LGBT elder housing summit? What are your problems that everybody doesn't have? And they don't really always understand that. And that's where education comes in. That we do have obstacles that are unique to us. You mentioned families of choice. Families of choice are not legally recognized in terms of. That's why marriage equality is important in a lot of ways, because you cannot, your best friend who's been in your life for 40 years is not your next of kin legally, and so we have all kinds of stuff that we have to deal with that that our heterosexual counterparts don't necessarily have to deal with. That's
correct. You're absolutely right. If you and I have a very close relationship, I may be more of a sister to you than your own sister. And yet, I wouldn't qualify as blood relative in a hospital scenario. So, I mean, I think you've hit the nail on the head on that perfectly. And, that question, and when I was in the process of raising equity for RainbowVision, that question came up a lot. Why do you need a place for LGBT people, and what needs are not met? And you listed some really intense ones, but I would always reverse that question in a certain way and look at it from the other side. And I would say, it's so interesting because we have what are basically, in this day and age, over 55 communities that are senior communities, but they're golf communities. Mm-hmm. So I would say, now nobody says, why do the golfers need a special community just for them? Okay.
Yeah.
But people would say, wow, we never thought of it like that, because people who move in are golfers, and that becomes the glue, the central, part of their lives, then their needs are met. But does that mean if I'm not a golfer, I play tennis, I'm going to be kept out? I mean, the same kind of questions that people would ask about why do LGBT people need a senior community, it's almost the same question as no one even thinks about asking, why do Jewish people like to live in a Jewish community? Why do Lutheran people, there are values and shared cultural shared cultural experiences that people want to continue to live in, or if they've never been able to experience it, would like to be a part of. I mean, we would see people who lived in God knows where, Pennsylvania, who felt like they died and went to heaven because, there was more than one gay person that lived in our community,
Yeah.
And when that person left that place in Pennsylvania, 50% of the gay people left because there were only two there, so.
Yes, and there's still an awful lot of hostility out there. Even now in Indiana, I grew up there. I fled when I was 18, but my parents, I kept going back to see my parents while they were alive. The marriage is illegal there now, but we're seeing this sort of backlash in a lot of places, and the governor's about to sign a bill that is a quote religious liberty bill, but it's not just that you don't have to, hold our weddings. No church has ever been able to force to marry anybody. It's never happened in this country. You don't have to marry anybody, but it will allow businesses to refuse services to, they say, gay couples, but I think it just means gay people. So what happens if you're a senior in Indiana?
Right.
And you want to go into a nursing home or a facility, a assisted living facility, and the owner says, "I'm a Christian," or
right.
I'm some other faith, and you can't come here. It's just really kind of scary.
It's frightening, and if you've been living, and this is always the big one they always write about this in most of the newspaper articles and magazine articles. They'd say, to have to go back into the closet after being out of the closet for X amount of years that's how they would start their articles. Because here you've lived possibly in your life out, and now you're going to go into some sort of community, and you need, at your most vulnerable moment in your life now, where you need the most help, and you may or may not be good with asking for help, but you may need help. And so somebody's able to refuse. And not only that, the business might not refuse you, but then the caregiver may not want to provide the care. So all of that is still problematic in our society. And this is not any different than what people had to deal with race and still have to deal with race.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like racism is over in this country by a long shot. So these are some really critical issues that are going to crop up during this time period. So in a sense, if ever we needed some safe spaces for LGBT seniors to be, this may be the most important time, since we are now moving into that period of time. Boomers are moving into that time. I mean, I'm 59 right now.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's like I'm planning what works, what doesn't work, and I'm actually considering, is there anything that exists, or do I need to, look at what still needs to be built? And that's where Senior Silver Living comes in. So,
it says that you were until January of this year, you served as Chief Strategy Officer at Choices Women's Medical Center in Jamaica. Were you living here until then?
Well, what happened is, in '97, I was in New York City from about 81 or 82 through 2000 through 2000. And during the time, the first part was, as I had said, I was in the music business, but the second part of my New York experience was working at Choices. And then I left to go to Santa Fe, New Mexico, to build that community, and that was about 10 years out there. And when RainbowVision underwent its economic crisis and we had to sell the property to a bigger conglomerate, I then came back to New York for 3 years, and I was in New York City for 3 years as Chief Strategy Officer to move some things forward, and at Choices, where I had previously worked, and now kind of put the support systems in for the Accountable Care Act and new technologies that had to do with those kinds of things. So I spent the 3 years in New York doing that.
Okay.
So, yes, I was in New York.
One almost final thing, because I was reading here, in 2009 you were selected to receive the prestigious Wells Fargo National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce Gay Business Owner of the Year Award. The reason this jumped out at me is a couple years ago I had been asked to speak for 10 minutes at this convention in New York for people who were marketing to the LGBT audience. And people, they got up and they did slideshows from different corporations. And the only time I saw myself sort of in one of these images was it was Wells Fargo. Mm-hmm. And they had they were doing a presentation, and one of the images they had up on the screen was like an older black lesbian couple. Mm-hmm. And when I spoke, I thanked them. I said, "Thank you for showing somebody who's over the age of 30 mm-hmm. and of color." You know, right. It was really nice. But I'm just telling you that for no particular reason.
No, I think you're saying it for a very important. It's an important reason, and some of those reasons are very dear to my heart. First of all, overall, I think that we're going to see more and more images and more HBO and more Hollywood, and we are actually seeing that. I mean, God knows Maggie Smith's been in every single movie and every single series right now. We're going to see more and more silver-haired people, in our cultural images that'll be reflected back to us. But the larger issue of race, which is what you've touched on, is just as critical as both age and certainly orientation. And so I am on the board of what's essentially a people of color organization in Brooklyn, which is Griot Circle. Mm-hmm. And that's the senior organization that particularly meets the needs for people of color. So these are critical images that need to be in the mix, shall we say, and they're just as important. And so you've hit on something very important. And Wells Fargo has been an ally in its business sense to the LGBT community for a long time. And so I'm not surprised that you found some of the images, there that you could say, wow, thank you for doing that, because it's a critical thing.
Well, it was such a stark reminder of the need to see yourself, or the need to see ourselves. Yes. And one of the refrains that I heard often from people at Sage and different peers that I would encounter, and it's why I started LGBTSR 4 years ago, was because they said, I feel invisible. I don't see myself anywhere. I'm not on the cover of gay magazines, I'm not on The Advocate and all of these things. And it's true. I think in some corners it's getting better. We have a long way to go, though. And last thing I wanted to ask you about is grab bars. Do you remember that conversation?
Yes, I do. Because somebody had mentioned, well, when grab bars get pretty, I think it was the woman from HUD, right? I mean, she had mentioned it, or did you mention it? I don't remember, but I remember, oh, yes, I think I turned around and I said, well, you could have brushed nickel grab bars. They've already made some beautiful things that you can install in your bathroom and retrofit it for the time where you need some help. And it's important. Design is critical. It's one of the things that's very important to me, universal design, and things that are accessible as we may have some issues with mobility as we age. And so these are important things. And that is really where I got to with SilverSenior Living, because I've had so many requests for help to bring forth some communities that are either sensitive to LGBT people or to those who are looking for sustainability and for green projects, all of these things, what I basically put under the larger umbrella of intentional community. And those would be underserved populations or niche populations that have their cultural and their particular concerns. And how will they be met during the time that now that we're moving towards our senior years? So mm-hmm. That's become a critical thing that's most motivating and inspiring to me, and something that I continue to work for and continually consult with people on right now, and organizations.
Well, I have been delighted to have you on the podcast and to talk to you again. It was very easy. How can people find you?
Well, they can email me at silverseniorliving@gmail.com, or they certainly can call me at 646-594-8619, and I would be delighted to work with those who would like to see themselves and their needs and wants represented in a community that they feel comfortable living with and in.
And I can vouch that you're a dynamic person, great personality, really friendly, just a delight.
Oh, thank you so much, and it's been wonderful to speak to you.
You too. Thanks a lot, and I will. I'll send you this link when I put it up tomorrow.
Perfect. Thanks again.
Thanks again, Joy.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.